So we have 3 speakers today, rather than 4. We had a last-minute conflict. So I am very pleased to tell you a little bit about each of our speakers today. Lee Menon is an assistant professor of English and linguistics in the Department of English. She joined Wichita State in the fall of 2016 after finishing her PhD in linguistics from University of Southern California. She directs a research lab that investigates meaning, structure, and representations shared across cognitive domains such as language, artificial language, music, and visual narrative. She is currently a service learning faculty fellow and the director of the linguistics program. She is also the associate editor of the Journal of South Asian Linguistics. Our second presenter, Charles Cober, teaches sociology courses at both the graduate and undergraduate level on topics of work and the economy, globalization, and sociological theory. His research examines contemporary changes in work and workplaces, focusing upon how workers experience these changes in terms of the work they do, the rewards they receive, and their relations with coworkers, employers, and their communities. He is the co-editor of the book, The Critical Study of Work, Labor, Technology, and Global Production, and is the author of a handbook for laid-off Wichita workers entitled, I've Been Laid Off, What Should I Do? Chuck has also published research articles and book reviews in several scholarly journals. He has also been active as a member and officer in several professional organizations and was 2016 president of the Association of Humanist Sociology. His current research focuses on what he has termed consumptive labor, or the work that people do in their roles as consumers, e.g., using self-service to complete purchases. He is also interested in the progress made in the rural community of Greensburg, Kansas, which was all but destroyed by a large tornado in 2007. Greensburg subsequently implemented a master plan to recover and rebuild the town's public buildings, infrastructure, and local economy, with the goal of becoming one of the most environmentally sustainable communities in the United States. Our final presenter today, Jason Vandekreek, is a research associate at WSU, assisting each of the 6 centers within the Community Engagement Institute. Jason finds great value in helping to identify and architect custom solutions where technology intersects with public health and community enrichment. He initially joined the Community Engagement Institute in 2012, working on projects for the Center for Applied Research and Evaluation. His previous work includes software and systems management for electronic health records, interactive digital marketing agencies, nonprofit workflow systems, learning management systems, data analysis automation toolkits, internet application providers, and communication strategy. Outside of work, Jason enjoys photography, tennis, gardening, and serving on the board of directors for Trees for Life, Teach for Life International. Everyone, please help me welcome our presenters today.
All right, good afternoon and thanks for being here today. I am Lee Menon. I'm an assistant professor in the English department. So I'm a linguist, and very often the first question that I get asked is, how many languages do you speak? Now, I am from India, so I do speak multiple languages, but that's a polyglot, not a linguist. And so recently, though, thanks to pop culture and the release of the movie Arrival, people ask me a different question. They ask me if it is true that linguists can indeed save the world. And I say, yes, we do possess skill sets that let us converse and maybe understand the language if extraterrestrial beings land on Earth. The reason I am a linguist is because we often take the subject of my field of study for granted, that is, language. Yet we still do not fully understand how the brain computes language or how the baby brain learns language in just under 4 years. My interest in my research lab has been to uncover patterns or representations that are shared across cognitive functions that are similar to language, such as music. We all use language and music on a day-to-day basis. So what are the fundamental similarities and dissimilarities in computing these faculties in the brain? Language comprehension is located at the intersection of the superior temporal gyrus with the angular gyrus, which is often called as the Wernicke's area, whereas the articulation of language is located in the inferior frontal gyrus, very often called as the Broca's area. You would know these areas from aphasia. Traditionally, linguistic and musical intelligence have been treated as two independent cognitive activities, with localized areas such as the motor, visual, or auditory cortex, but a large amount of the primate cortex is called as association cortex, as it coordinates higher domain general activities such as learning and reasoning. Neuroimaging studies have shown brain activation in the musical semantics component versus verbal semantics component using PET scan comparisons. The results have shown that the left hemisphere of the brain appears to be specialized for rhythm, syntax, and access to musical semantic and syntactic representations. Neuropsychology, on the other hand, favors a domain-specific view. However, when similar cognitive operations are conducted on language and music, the brain activates resources and resource sharing, that is, the sharing of neural resources between the two domains. So we can ask the question, what representations are shared between language and music? We can hypothesize that linguistic and musical syntactic representations can be stored in different hemispheres of the brain, whereas there can be overlap in the networks that provide neural resources for the activation of stored syntactic representations. In my lab, we conduct psycholinguistic experiments investigating the interconnection of linguistic and musical syntactic processing with respect to the shared neural networks. We give participants two tasks, a language task, either reading comprehension or production task, and a music task that involves listening and making a preferential choice. Here are some examples of stimuli we used. These are called as relative clause fragments that can have completions that either attach to the structurally higher noun phrase, the doctors were working, or the structurally lower noun phrase, the student was studying. The plural agreement helps disambiguate the relative clause completions. We model this language ambiguity in music by using the circle of fifths, which shows the relationship among the 12 tones of the chromatic scale in Western tonal music. If you look at C major, the notes F and G are a perfect fourth and a fifth apart. Thus, we create musical stimuli using the piano, where the last two notes attach back to the first three or the second three notes. We've also used agreement attraction error sentences, such as the keys to the cabinet are in the drawer, where the agreement on the verb matches the plural number on the subject, the keys, or erroneous agreement mismatches, such as the keys to the cabinet is in the drawer, where the singular intervener, the cabinet, forces an erroneous singular agreement on the verb. The musical stimuli for these were recorded on a guitar in a studio, and we manipulated the match condition in C major to include a coda that refers back to a chord that's already played in the series. Whereas for the mismatch condition, the coda is a chord that's a variation indicative of a key change because of its quality, either major or minor in that position of the scale. Experiments are run on PsychoPy, a psychology software used for psycholinguistics experiments, and participants with no musical training are given the critical conditions. Either the music task followed by the language production or comprehension task, or the language task followed by a musical preference task. Each participant goes through 180 trials as the critical trials are interspersed with fillers. Our broad finding is that after listening to a musical high attachment stimulus, people produce relative clauses with high attachment completion counterintuitively to what is expected of English, a language that prefers low attachment completions more. We have also conducted the study in Spanish in Spain with similar results. We have also been able to show that after reading and comprehending ungrammatical mismatch agreement attraction sentences, participants prefer ungrammatical musical pieces and vice versa. That is, transfer of structural prediction happens between language and music. Thus, our experimental results have shown the existence of domain general syntactic processing with the use of multiple neural networks being accessed and used for abstract cognitive operations that are being computed by brain circuits involved in generating syntactic expectancies. Our broader interest and current studies in the lab involve investigating the intersection of language and artificial language learning, language and comics and visual narrative, and we hope that these results from Western tonal music will create a pathway to test a more intricate system of music, namely the Indian Carnatic classical music. Studies such as these show that language is at the fundamental core of cognitive studies, and studying language and its interfaces requires an integrated interdisciplinary approach involving cognitive theory and behavioral methods from linguistics, psychology, and neuroscience. Thank you.
So if I want to get through this, should I sing a song first? That might help. So today I'm going to talk about Greensburg, Kansas, and the importance of the residents using their own work outside of rebuilding and outside of their employment to rebrand the community to be sustainable. I think this has been a neglected aspect of Greensburg. Today I'm going to talk about Greensburg, Kansas, as I said, and the importance of residents participating in the rebranding of Greensburg as a sustainable community, which I think has been neglected in current narratives. This research combines two of my interests. The first is theoretical in a concept called consumptive labor, and the second is in Greensburg, Kansas, and the sustainable disaster recovery after the tornado in 2007. In terms of consumptive labor, there are three main types. The first is what we do as a quasi-employee and self-service. The second is as a quasi-supervisor. We report people driving, for example, but the most important and what matters here for this presentation is the marketing and advertising function that we all do when we wear brands and show people our motorcycles, for example, which was my research vehicle when I went to Greensburg in 2009, 2010, 2011. I went there for a couple of days a week for the better part of a school year and interviewed people, took field notes, and immersed myself in the culture of Greensburg. So most of you know where Greensburg is. It's the blue dot right there, and it's in western Kansas. And before the tornado, it was a struggling agricultural community. The energy industry, farming was not producing the kind of jobs that it once had. And you can see that the tornado damaged the struggling community physically. It devastated it. 1,400 buildings were destroyed, 10 people died, and it just looks like a bomb went off. The severity of the storm, though, also opened up an opportunity because they had to rebuild, and they had to come up with a new approach. And that new approach was that Greensburg would go green. And it would focus on water conservation, for example, which is why I have the picture of one of the many, many eco-toilets that would soon flow into Greensburg. It also focused on building with reclaimed materials, building to LEED Platinum or LEED Gold, LEED certified standards, as well as recycling, and using alternative energy was very important. Now, as this master plan took off, it caught the attention of many, many people. It was an international media spectacle. And charities rolled in literally by the busload. There were 7,000 AmeriCorps volunteers, 100 million of federal aid, and the more that took place in terms of the charity and the work to make Greensburg green, the more media coverage it got. But I think the most important media coverage was the Discovery Channel Planet Green series, Greensburg. A few days after the tornado, they were there with a film crew because they'd already planned out the whole show but just needed a location. So when Greensburg, the tornado occurred, they showed up. Leonardo DiCaprio was the producer, and you could see Discovery Channel film crew all over town, because Greensburg's a really small town and there's not very many people. So everyone became a reality TV star unless they avoided it, and it was hard to avoid. The high schoolers had a code to tell each other when a film crew was sneaking up on them so they wouldn't say something embarrassing, in fact. Another way that Greensburg residents participated was as volunteers, ambassadors, and this was Greensburg Greentown, a tornado-proof eco-home, and it was an office set up to be a liaison to the community, to educate the community, to speak with mass media, and even to try out some of those eco-toilets and many other products that were flowing into Greensburg. This is a sign in front of one of the first buildings, the business incubator, and you can see that Frito-Lay, right there, Sun Chips is prominently, their logo is there, and Frito-Lay was also one of the advertisers on the Greensburg series, so there was a connection there. This is a first LEED Platinum building in Kansas. It was built by KU students, and part of the drama was how to pay for it. And if you watch the series, Leonardo DiCaprio calls up and donates a cool $250,000 to finish paying it off. That was much of the drama of the first season. But they were very successful in getting the money for all these LEED Platinum buildings, and they have more than any other community per capita in the country. And you can see there's several of them here that are LEED Platinum, and this stands for Leadership in Environmental and Engineering Design, the highest environmental standards. So they were very successful there. And before this, the Big Well was the biggest tourist attraction, and now with their Big Well, they have a bigger Big Well museum. So they're doing pretty well. There are some issues. For example, there was a portion of the town that was not hit by the tornado, and here's a picture of it. It's the east side, and some of those residents indicated that they felt excluded and left out, and they didn't receive the aid, and they feel like, maybe their tax money's going somewhere where they didn't want it to go. So I think there is that issue. On the other hand, in the central part of Greensburg, these kind of homes were going up, and people who could afford to rebuild built bigger, greener, and they were able to buy multiple lots from people who sold them. So you do have a very sustainable community. The question is this just for the relative few, or can it be more inclusive? The other thing about Greensburg here, and this approach to using the residents to rebrand itself was heavily based on consumption, and I do wonder if solving climate change and consumption, solving climate change environmental problems, if this is the way to go. But be it what it is, the residents of Greensburg, through their consumptive labor, made it what it is today.
Well, this first slide is an expression of who I am and what my background is. I've been writing software since the age of 5. I had a computer that could only do one thing at a time, and you saved programs to cassette tape. The GOAT is, of course, to remind ourselves not to take work too seriously. This lady here, Ruth Ann, she wanted to be here today, but she could not. So when we talk about data analysis, the tools we use today in modern times, it's more of an ecosystem. And what I'd like to get into is, where did this come from? How did it come about? How do we have an ecosystem of shared tools? So one example I could point to is a very key piece of infrastructure, and this is a piece of software that reads and writes files. It's called a database, but it's an embedded database. It's called Sqlite. The creator was a single person. He now does have a team, but it's used in every single device you've ever touched. Everybody in the room has used this piece of software, whether you know it or not. What we saw is a trend year after year to more and more open access systems. At WSU, we use these Jupyter notebooks, and their purpose is to do repeatable shared science, to blend coding with different languages and different documentation and different visualizations. We found this pretty approachable, Python and R as languages, versus some of the tools that have been taught here at the university, which is SPSS and MATLAB. They can be too costly comparatively and can be kind of messy to reproduce the science. This is an animation of a Jupyter notebook. It's basically, it runs in a web browser. And so what you see there are cells you can interact with individually. A cell can be documentation, it can be an interactive element. And we'll see here, this is a dashboard. And what you can do is explore the data you have that you've read in and then filtered and visualized. This is a Kansas map, you're going to see a lot of maps, but this is a Kansas map we made for the Kansas Prevention Collaborative. It is fully interactive. Each county in Kansas you can click on, and you can look at a range of different behavioral health indicators. This happens to be a suicide rate map. And one challenge of this is to take data from 6, 7, 10 different sources and put it together in one map. So let the user explore what's going on in their community without sort of giving them a difficult process of where did the data come from? Is it a different format? Is it readable? So we're using these in this project to help unite communities around common goals. Early childhood development is another focus area in our work. And what's nice about that is we give them information through evaluation. They give us the data, but we actually give insights to them back from their data. This is kind of a collage of 5 different maps that we made, and each one is a risk factor, which goes into, is a child prepared to be school ready? So across these different factors, we can actually plot them individually, or we can make this one, which is a cumulative risk score. So each of those 5 you saw got combined together to come up with a risk score. And what we can do is try and serve the children in that community who are at the highest risk. So one of the challenges we definitely have is we can't just produce one report for one audience. We have the public, we have stakeholders, we have government employees, we have the individual grantees, we have other researchers. So this chart here, you've seen it before, it's a bar chart with shaded area. This is kind of what we're going for here, is to explain what the topic is. Why is it meaningful? What does the chart mean? What insight are you supposed to take out of this? Those arrows are supposed to highlight each of the things we're trying to accomplish. So versus a standard bar chart, this is much more readable and insightful. We also build websites. On this one, each of the boxes, it has literally 10 pages of information, but we wanted to keep it down to just a few words. The more and more the user wants to dig into the facts, they can. So on the right-hand side, you'll see it pops up, and there's even footnotes that will expand if they want more and more data. So what came out of that? I mean, it was a lot of work, but we really do see that these grantees in Kansas who are doing work for children are able to use that data, and they see value in it now. They're able to make more decisions based upon it. I really do think that design counts, and that's why this slide is here. I didn't make this graph, but it's from a beautiful data website where they try and highlight news, which is positive. And if you do look at the data across the world, we are doing better in a lot of aspects. This is a plug for my own website. It's called alienoutliers.com. This was a fun demo to a few years ago. Steph Curry was an unbelievable shooter, and he was almost off the charts, which technically he is. And credits for a lot of the work you've seen on the screen is the team I have here. 2 of them are here. Lynn and Mark happen to be here today, so just like to acknowledge the team as well. All right, that's it.